Sophia stood in the doorway of our small apartment, the one we had made a home together, her hands gripping the handle of the designer suitcase her mother had sent for her. Our newborn twins lay asleep in their crib, their tiny chests rising and falling, blissfully unaware that their mother was about to walk out of their lives. And me? I stood frozen, feeling the air grow heavier with every second that passed. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sophia looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the briefest moment, I saw hesitation in her eyes. It was there, the struggle, the part of her that still loved me, that still wanted to stay. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold, calculated mask she had worn ever since her mother had entered the picture. "My mother is right," she finally said, her voice sharp, almost robotic. "This life isn't for me." My stomach twisted. "This life?" I repeated, barely recognizing my own voice. "You mean our life? The one we built together?" She exhaled sharply, avoiding my gaze. "You don't understand, Michael. I never should have been here in the first place. My mother." I took a step forward, desperation clawing at my throat. "Your mother doesn't love you, Sophia. Not like I do. Not like our children do." For a second, just a second, she wavered. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. Her lips parted as if she was about to say something. I wanted to believe that meant there was hope, that she would drop her bags and come back to me, to us. Then the sound of a car horn outside shattered whatever illusion I had left. Her mother's driver was waiting. The decision had already been made. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "I need a future, Michael. I need stability. You can't give me that." I felt something inside me snap. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize love, family, and loyalty weren't stable enough for you." She flinched, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned to look at the sleeping babies in their crib. My heart pounded. She wouldn't just leave them. She couldn't. "Sophia," I pleaded, my voice barely steady, "don't do this to them." Her hand hovered over our son's tiny head, but she never touched him. Maybe she knew that if she did, she would break. Maybe she was already broken and just didn't want me to see it. "My mother said." I slammed my fist against the table, startling her. "I don't give a damn what your mother said. What about what you want? What about our children? You're just going to abandon them? Abandon me?" The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had hit the target. Her jaw clenched, her eyes burned with something I couldn't quite name. Shame? Anger? Fear? "You think this is easy for me," she hissed. "You think I want to walk away?" I took another step forward, lowering my voice. "Then don't." Silence. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away like I had burned her. "I have to," she whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. She turned toward the door, and panic surged through me. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "Sophia, if you leave now, there's no coming back from this." Her shoulders tensed. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she would stop. But then she walked out, suitcase rolling behind her, and my entire world collapsed in on itself. I stood there, staring at the open door, waiting for her to come back, to say she made a mistake, that she chose us over her mother's money and power. But she didn't. The car door slammed shut, the engine roared to life, and within seconds, she was gone. The apartment was suffocatingly quiet, too quiet, and then, as if sensing the change, one of our twins stirred, letting out a soft whimper that quickly turned into a cry. I turned toward them, feeling a sharp, unbearable pain in my chest. They had no idea that the mother who had carried them, who had whispered promises to them before they were even born, had just left them without a second glance. I stumbled toward the crib, my hands shaking as I picked up my daughter, cradling her against my chest. "It's okay, baby girl," I murmured, rocking her gently. "I've got you." I didn't know if I was saying it for her or for myself. I sank into the rocking chair beside the crib, staring blankly at the empty doorway. I had always imagined our future together. Sophia, me, and our twins. Late-night feedings, first steps, bedtime stories, growing old together. But now, that future had been ripped away from me. all because of one woman's influence. Her mother had always hated me. From the moment Sophia and I started dating, she had looked at me like I was dirt beneath her feet. She never missed an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't have the right family background, the right money, the right name. And she had one. I clenched my jaw, gripping my daughter tighter as I swore under my breath. No, she hadn't one, because I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I looked down at my baby girl, then at my son, still sleeping peacefully. They were my family now, and no matter how hard it was, no matter how broken I felt in this moment, I was going to give them the best life possible, with or without Sophia. I pressed a gentle kiss to my daughter's forehead and wiped away a tear that had fallen onto her tiny cheek. I promise you, I whispered, I'll never leave you. And as the night stretched on, as exhaustion and grief threatened to pull me under, I held on to that one promise like a lifeline. I had lost my wife, but I wasn't going to lose my children. When you become a father, there's this unspoken promise you make, to always be there, to protect, to provide, to love. I never thought I'd have to keep that promise alone. The first few weeks after Sophia left were brutal. No, brutal doesn't even begin to describe it. It was like being thrown into a storm with no shelter, no warning, no life jacket. Just me, struggling to stay afloat while two tiny lives depended on me for everything. Nights became an endless cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and exhaustion so deep it felt like my bones were made of lead. My twins, barely weeks old, had no idea that their mother had walked out on them. No idea that the man holding them at 3 a.m, whispering lullabies with a voice cracked from exhaustion, was barely holding it together. And that's the thing. I had to hold it together. There was no other option. I was their father, the only parent they had left. I couldn't afford to break. But God, did I want to? Before Sophia left, I had imagined fatherhood differently. I thought I'd be sharing these moments with her, taking turns waking up for late-night feedings, marveling together at the tiny fingers and soft coos of our children, fighting over who got to hold them next. Instead, I was alone. The house, once filled with whispered dreams about our future, now felt hollow, an empty shell where my wife's absence was louder than any words she could have spoken. I can't tell you how many nights I sat in the dim glow of the nursery, my daughter in one arm, my son in the other, watching them sleep and wondering how the hell I was supposed to do this alone. How was I going to work? How was I going to provide? Would they even remember her? Would they ask about her one day, and what would I say? The thoughts were endless, relentless, suffocating. If the emotional toll wasn't enough, the financial reality hit me like a freight train. Sophia had come from money, a lot of money, and while I had always been financially stable, I wasn't wealthy by any means. We had built a comfortable life together, but when she left, she took more than just her presence. She took the security that came with being part of her world. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one night, bills scattered in front of me, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how I was going to stretch my savings. Formula, diapers, rent, utilities, it all added up fast. And the worst part? Childcare was a luxury I couldn't afford. Hiring a nanny? Out of the question. Daycare? Too expensive. I could barely afford the essentials, let alone the thousands it would take to put both kids into a decent care facility while I worked. That left me with exactly one option. Figure it out on my own. The thing about being a single father is that the world isn't built for us. When a woman is raising kids alone, people sympathize. They rally around her, offer help, give support. When it's a man, people assume you failed. At job interviews, I'd mention that I had newborn twins at home, and instead of admiration, I got doubt. How do you plan to juggle work and childcare? They'd ask. I had no answer. I wanted to say, the same way any mother would. I'd figure it out, but I saw it in their eyes, hesitation. A man raising babies alone? That didn't fit their image of a responsible, reliable employee. I started keeping it to myself, hiding the bags under my eyes, drinking more coffee than I knew was healthy, pushing through interviews with a desperation I hated to admit. And still, rejection after rejection. It was like the world had already decided. Fathers weren't meant to do this alone. One night, after another long day of searching for work, The weight of everything finally broke me. My son had been crying for an hour. My daughter refused to sleep, and I was running on fumes. I tried everything. Rocking, singing, even just holding them close. But nothing worked. And then, as I stood there, swaying in the middle of the nursery, feeling like the worst father in the world, my knees buckled. I sank to the floor, holding both of them against my chest, and for the first time since Sophia left, I cried. Not silent, dignified tears. Ugly, shaking sobs that I couldn't stop. "I'm sorry," I whispered over and over again, rocking them as if that would somehow fix everything. I wasn't enough. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't capable enough. I was failing them. And worst of all, I wasn't sure I had it in me to keep going. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point, exhaustion won. My body gave in. My mind shut down, and I must have dozed off. When I woke up, it was morning. The sunlight was filtering through the window, casting a warm glow on my babies' faces. They had both fallen asleep in my arms, their tiny hands gripping onto my shirt like I was their entire world. And that's when it hit me. I was their entire world. They didn't care that I wasn't rich. They didn't care that I hadn't slept in days, or that my bank account was running dry. All they cared about was that I was there, that I held them, that I loved them. And at that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this defeat me. I wasn't going to let Sophia's abandonment define our future. I wasn't going to be the man who crumbled under the weight of hardship. I was going to be the father they deserved. I pressed a kiss to both of their foreheads and wiped my tears away. "No more breaking down," I whispered, voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "No more doubting myself." From that day forward, I refused to be a victim of my circumstances. I was going to fight like hell to give my kids the life they deserved. I didn't know how yet, but I would figure it out, because that's what fathers do. And I was damn sure going to be the best one I could be. The moment I decided I wouldn't let Sophia's abandonment define my life, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a sudden burst of motivation or a cinematic moment of clarity. It was a slow, painful realization that if I didn't take control of my own fate, my twins would suffer. And that was unacceptable. So, I wiped my tears, put one foot in front of the other, and forced myself to keep moving. At first, my focus was simple. Find a job. Any job. I spent hours every day sending out resumes, knocking on doors, attending interviews. I dressed the part, rehearsed my answers, and walked into every office with a forced confidence I didn't always feel. And still, rejection after rejection. It wasn't my qualifications. I had experience, skills, but the second they learned I was a single father with newborn twins, the interest in my application vanished. I'd hear things like, "We're looking for someone with more flexibility. This role might require long hours. Would that be an issue? How do you plan to balance work and childcare?" It didn't take long for me to realize what they were really saying. They didn't believe I could handle both. It was frustrating. No, it was infuriating. Mothers did this all the time, and they were celebrated for it. But a father? Suddenly, I was unreliable, a risk. I wanted to scream at them. "You think I have a choice? You think I want to struggle?" But yelling wouldn't change anything. I needed to adapt. One afternoon, after yet another rejection, I walked into the grocery store with exactly $12.37 in my pocket. Diapers, formula, baby wipes. I stood in the aisle, staring at the prices, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't have enough. That was the moment it really hit me. I was failing. I couldn't even provide the basics for my kids. For the first time since Sophia left, panic set in. What if I couldn't do this? What if I was actually as unfit as the world seemed to believe? I felt like a failure. And then, my daughter grabbed my finger. She was too little to understand what was happening, but that tiny grip sent a wave of clarity through me. I was all they had. If I fell apart now, there would be no one to catch them. I forced myself to take a breath. There had to be another way. That night, as I rocked my son to sleep, an idea started forming. I had been applying for jobs that fit my past experience, corporate roles, office jobs, things that required long hours and childcare I couldn't afford. What if I was looking at this all wrong? What if, instead of trying to fit into someone else's world, I built something of my own? The thought terrified me. I had no business experience, no funding, no connections. But what I did have, a reason. And sometimes, a reason is enough. I stayed up all night, brainstorming ideas. What was something I could do from home? Something that didn't require huge upfront costs? And then it hit me, baby products. I had spent the past few months immersed in everything related to babies, clothes, accessories, essentials. I knew what worked, what was overpriced, what parents actually needed. I could create custom baby products, things that were functional but personal. I grabbed an old notebook and started scribbling down ideas. Personalized onesies, custom baby blankets, unique milestone markers for parents to track their baby's growth. The more I wrote, the more the idea took shape. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Hell, it would probably be the hardest thing I'd ever done. But the alternative? Spending my days begging for jobs that didn't want me, while my children went without. That wasn't an option. The next morning, I started small. I found a cheap supplier for blank onesies and fabric paint. I taught myself how to design and print custom baby clothing. My first attempt? A disaster. The paint smudged, the fabric bunched up. It looked like something a 5-year-old had made. But I didn't stop. I watched tutorials. I experimented. I kept trying, failing, trying again. Eventually, I got better. With my last bit of savings, I built a small online store. Nothing fancy, just a basic website with a few designs. Then, I took a deep breath and posted my first ad. Days passed. Nothing. I checked my website obsessively, refreshing the page over and over. Zero sales. Doubt crept in. Had I just wasted what little money I had left? And then, a notification. My first sale. It was a small order, just one onesie, customized with a baby's name. But it was everything. It was proof that someone, somewhere, believed in what I was doing. That night, as I packaged that tiny onesie, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. One sale turned into 2. 2 turned into 5. Soon, word of mouth started spreading. Mothers loved the personal touch. Friends told friends. I started getting requests for different designs. I wasn't making millions, but I was making enough. Enough to keep a roof over our heads. Enough to put food on the table. Enough to look at my kids and say, "We're going to be okay." One evening, as I was finishing up orders, my phone buzzed. An email from a baby boutique owner. She had seen my products online and wanted to talk about a partnership. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This was it. The moment I realized, this wasn't just survival anymore. I wasn't just getting by. I was building something real. That night, as I tucked my twins into bed, I whispered the same promise I had made months ago. I'll never let you down. Only this time, I believed it. Because I wasn't that broken man anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to save us. I was saving us myself. And nothing, not Sophia, not her mother, not the doubts that once consumed me, was going to stop me now. Starting a business wasn't the hard part. Keeping it alive was. Every day felt like a battle, a constant push against doubt, exhaustion, and the nagging fear that this whole thing would collapse before it had a chance to grow. But I had no choice. I was all my twins had. And that meant failure wasn't an option. I worked through the nights, my twins asleep beside me in their crib, while I printed designs, answered customer messages, and figured out how to run a business on pure willpower alone. During the day, I was a father first, feeding, changing, soothing, playing. During the night, I was an entrepreneur, hunched over my tiny desk, hands stained with fabric paint, running on coffee and sheer determination. Some nights, I barely slept at all. I'd hear one of the twins stir, and exhaustion would claw at me, telling me to let them cry for just 1 minute longer. But I couldn't. I wasn't just their dad. I was everything to them, and that meant pushing through, even when my body screamed for rest. There were so many mistakes. I priced my products too low at first, barely making enough to break even. I trusted the wrong suppliers, ended up with defective materials, and had to refund customers out of my own pocket. One month, I miscalculated shipping costs so badly that I lost money on every order. I wanted to quit so many times. But every time I thought about giving up, I'd hear my twins laugh, see their tiny hands reaching for me, and I'd remember. This was for them. So I kept going. I researched, I learned, I adjusted. I raised my prices, negotiated better deals, and started handling every single part of the business myself to save costs. Little by little, it worked. Orders increased. Mothers loved my designs, and before I knew it, my online store was gaining traction. One day, I woke up to 50 orders overnight. 50. I stared at my phone in disbelief, heart pounding. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a side hustle anymore. This was a real business. But with success came new problems. I was still just one person, juggling a growing company while raising twins alone. I needed help. I had no choice but to adapt. I hired a part-time assistant, someone to help process orders and manage customer service. I turned my tiny living room into a makeshift workspace, shelves lined with baby clothes, shipping boxes stacked in every corner. I had to set boundaries, dedicating mornings to my twins, afternoons to work, and nights to catching up on both. It wasn't easy. There were days I missed out on milestones. Their first crawl, their first attempt at a word, because I was buried in work. The guilt ate me alive. But then, one night, as I sat on the floor with them, exhausted from a 12-hour workday, my daughter reached out and touched my face. "Dada," she whispered, my first name from her lips. Tears blurred my vision. This was why I was doing it. For them. For our future. For the life I had promised them when Sophia walked out the door. The more successful I became, the more people started to notice, including Sophia's mother. One afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. I knew the number immediately. Her. My stomach twisted, but I answered. "Michael," she greeted me smoothly, her voice as cold and detached as I remembered. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She sighed, as if my existence exhausted her. "I heard about your little business. I must admit, I'm surprised. I never thought you had the capability to succeed." I clenched my jaw. I didn't need her approval. She got to the point. "Sophia has been reconsidering some things." She abandoned her children," I interrupted. "There's nothing left to reconsider." She was pressured, her mother said, voice clipped. She made a mistake. But mistakes can be corrected. I laughed bitterly. "Not this one." Silence. Then she lowered her voice, as if she were offering me something I should be grateful for. "Michael, if you want, I can help you. I have connections. Investors. I can turn your business into something much bigger." I knew what she was really saying. She wanted control. The same way she had controlled Sophia's life. She wanted to do the same to me. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You're being foolish," she snapped. "No," I repeated. "I'm being free." And with that, I ended the call. I had fought too hard to build something on my own. I wasn't about to let the person who tore my family apart step back in and dictate my future. That night, I watched my twins sleep, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I had started with nothing, just heartbreak and 2 babies who depended on me. Now, I had a business, a home, a future. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And the best part? I had done it without Sophia, without her mother, without anyone but myself. I had proven them all wrong. I pressed a kiss to my son's forehead, then my daughter's. "We made it," I whispered. For the first time since Sophia left, I truly believed it. For all the years I had known Sophia, I believed she had everything. Money, power, an easy life paved by privilege. But what I had failed to see, what she had failed to see, was that none of it truly belonged to her. It was her mother's world, and Sophia was merely a pawn in a game she had never learned to play for herself. After she left, I stopped thinking about what her life was like. I had more important things to worry about: my twins, my business, my own survival. But fate has a funny way of circling back. Because while I was clawing my way up from the bottom, Sophia was slowly realizing that she had traded love for an empty throne. From the outside, Sophia's life looked untouched by hardship. She lived in a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive part of town, surrounded by marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and servants who catered to her every whim. She had a closet filled with designer clothes, a car that cost more than my apartment, and a mother who reminded her at every opportunity that she had made the right decision. "You would have been miserable with Michael," her mother would say, sipping imported tea from a delicate china cup. "You deserve a life of comfort." Sophia wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that leaving had been the right choice, that she had escaped a small life in favor of something greater. But then the nights would come, and the house would be too quiet, the luxury too cold, the bed too empty. She had walked away from the only people who had truly loved her, and the weight of that decision was beginning to crush her. At first, she told herself she was just adjusting. Her mother had reassured her that it was natural to feel unsettled after such a big change, that soon she would see the benefits of her decision. And so, Sophia tried to fit into this new world. She went to charity galas, shopping sprees, high society brunches filled with women who spoke about vacations in the Maldives and the latest fashion trends. But nothing felt real. She found herself glancing at her phone more often than she wanted to admit, her fingers hovering over my name, over old pictures of us, over the last photos she had taken of our babies before she left. She never dialed. She didn't know what she would say. Instead, she buried herself in distractions. She let her mother arrange dates with wealthy businessmen, went to social events, tried to pretend she was the same Sophia she had always been. But when she lay in bed at night, the truth gnawed at her. She had lost something she would never get back. One evening, at a lavish dinner party, someone mentioned a local entrepreneur who had built an entire business from scratch. "Amazing story," a man across the table said. "Single father. Started with nothing. Now his company is booming." Sophia wasn't listening at first. She was swirling the wine in her glass, barely paying attention to the conversation. Then she heard the name. Michael. Her stomach twisted. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as she tried to process what she had just heard. The words that followed hit her like a sledgehammer. Incredible guy. Built the whole thing while raising twins alone? Honestly, I don't know how he did it. He's an inspiration. His brand, Little Warriors, it's everywhere now. Sophia's hands trembled. Twins. They were talking about our children. Her children. For the first time in a long time, she felt fear. Because it had never truly occurred to her that I might not have needed her after all. That maybe, just maybe, I had moved on without her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her silk sheets, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't want to have. What did my life look like now? Were the twins happy? Did they even remember her? Would I ever forgive her? Unable to stop herself, she grabbed her phone, opened her laptop, and did something she had been too afraid to do before. She looked me up, and what she found left her breathless. My name wasn't just a mention in a dinner party conversation. It was everywhere. Interviews, articles, photos of me, standing beside racks of baby clothes, talking about my journey as a single father turned business owner. And then, the video, a recent news segment featuring me and the twins. She clicked on it without thinking, and within seconds, her world shattered. The video opened with footage of me in my workshop, smiling as I packed orders, adjusting tiny baby clothes on a rack. I looked different. Not broken. Not struggling. Stronger. Happier. Then the screen cut to the twins. Laughing. Running. Playing in a park. And as she watched their tiny faces, so full of life, so full of joy, Sophia broke down. Because they didn't look like children who had been abandoned. They didn't look like children who had suffered in her absence. They looked happy, loved, whole. Without her, she clutched the phone, her heart racing. The interviewer's voice filled the room. Michael, what's your biggest motivation? The camera zoomed in on me, and my answer was immediate. My kids. They saved me. Sophia gasped, pressing a hand over her mouth. At the end of the day, I don't regret a thing, I continued. Because everything I've built, everything I've achieved, it's all for them. And I wouldn't change a single moment. The video ended. The room was silent. And Sophia? She was shaking. Because in that moment, she realized the horrible, undeniable truth. She had made the worst mistake of her life. And now? She was too late to fix it. Sophia's hands trembled as she stared at the black screen of her laptop, her breath coming in uneven gasps. The video had ended, but the images refused to leave her mind. Michael. Our children. They looked so happy. Without me. The reality of it clawed at my chest, suffocating me more than my mother's perfectly curated life ever could. I had left them, convinced that I was choosing the better path, the life I was meant to have. I had told myself it was for the best, that they would struggle without me, that Michael wouldn't be able to handle it alone. But I was wrong. He had built something beautiful, something successful. And worse, he didn't need me. A sharp knock on my bedroom door pulled me from my spiral of thoughts. Sophia? My mother's clipped voice sliced through the heavy silence. Dinner's ready. Don't make our guests wait. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'm not hungry. There was a pause. Then, in the icy tone that had dictated my entire life, she said, "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic? That was what she called this? I closed my eyes, gripping the edges of my desk. I had given up my family for this, for her approval, for a life that suddenly felt like a gilded cage, cold and suffocating. Another knock. This time sharper. I said, "I'm not hungry, Mother," I snapped, surprising even myself. Silence. Then her footsteps retreated. I let out a shaky breath, running a hand through my hair. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I needed to see them. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way Michael had looked in that interview. Strong, confident, alive. I saw the twins laughing, playing, living a life that had no space for me in it. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed to see them. Even if Michael slammed the door in my face. Even if my children no longer recognized me. I needed to face what I had done. But first, I had to get out of this house. I stepped into the dining room, where my mother was already seated, sipping tea as she scrolled through her phone. She barely looked up when I entered. "You ignored dinner last night," she remarked, setting her cup down. "That's rude." I clenched my jaw. "I wasn't hungry." She raised an eyebrow, finally looking at me properly. "Something's wrong." I exhaled, gripping the back of the chair across from her. "I need to see Michael." Her expression didn't change. "That's a terrible idea. I need to see my children." "They're not your children anymore, Sophia," she said flatly. "You made your choice. And look where it got you." Something snapped inside me. Where did it get me, Mother? I shot back. Alone? Miserable? Trapped in this house like a perfectly decorated doll? Her eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I've spent my entire life watching my tone, watching my words, letting you dictate every decision I've ever made. And I listened to you when you told me to leave them." She set her phone down, studying me as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "And now you regret it?" The question hung in the air. I felt like she already knew the answer. "Michael has built a life without you, Sophia," she continued, her voice calm, controlled. "You showing up now, what do you think that will accomplish?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I don't know." Her lips curved into something cruelly amused. "Then let it go. Let it go." I looked around the dining room, at the expensive chandelier, the perfect floral arrangement in the center of the table, the vast space that felt emptier than ever. I thought about my children, the home I had abandoned, the man I had once loved. And suddenly, I saw my mother for who she really was. Not a protector, not a mentor, a woman who had spent her entire life controlling everyone around her. I had been one of her greatest successes, but not anymore. I stood up. She didn't move. "Where are you going?" I grabbed my coat, walking toward the door. "To fix what I can." Her voice was sharp as a blade. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to walk back in." I froze, hand on the doorknob. That was it. The final test. I turned back, looking her dead in the eye. I wasn't planning on it. And then I walked out. The drive to Michael's place felt like the longest of my life. Every mile was a step toward the consequences of my own actions. Would he even let me in? Would my children even know who I was? I clenched the steering wheel, forcing myself not to turn around. This was my doing. I had to face it. By the time I reached his neighborhood, my hands were shaking. I parked outside his home, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. The house was simple, nothing like the mansion I had left behind, but it looked warm. The lights inside were on. And then, the front door opened. Michael stepped outside, holding a bag of trash, his hair slightly messy, his expression tired but peaceful. And for the first time, I saw what I had never allowed myself to see before. He was happy, even without me, especially without me. I swallowed hard, stepping out of the car before I lost my nerve. He turned, his eyes landing on me. The bag of trash hit the ground. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, his voice, low and guarded. "What are you doing here?" I exhaled. I saw the interview. His jaw tightened. And I felt my throat close. I had so much to say, but no words felt right. So I said the only thing that mattered. "I'm sorry." Michael's face remained unreadable. "For what?" I blinked, my vision blurring with sudden tears. "For everything. For leaving. For listening to my mother. For thinking I could ever be happy without them." Michael exhaled, shaking his head. "You can't just come back now, Sophia." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I know." Silence stretched between us. Then, he stepped forward slightly, looking me in the eye. "They don't remember you," he said softly. The pain of it ripped through me like a knife. I covered my mouth, nodding again. "I deserve that." Michael studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "I don't hate you, Sophia, but we don't need you anymore." Tears fell freely now. I nodded one last time, stepping back. I needed to see it for myself." Michael said nothing, and as I turned back toward my car, my heart breaking all over again, I knew I had lost them forever. I drove away from Michael's house feeling like my entire body had been hollowed out. The night air was cool, but I could barely breathe. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my vision blurred with unshed tears. It was over. I had come, hoping, what, exactly? That he would forgive me? That I could somehow piece together the life I had so carelessly thrown away? But the truth had been staring me in the face the moment Michael looked at me with nothing in his eyes. Not love, not anger, just indifference. And that hurt more than anything, because it meant I was no longer a part of his world, no longer a part of their world. I don't know how long I drove before pulling into an empty parking lot. The silence was deafening. I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel, and let the first sob tear through me. This was my doing. I had believed my mother's words. I had let her convince me that leaving Michael was the right choice, that I was choosing a better life. But what had I actually chosen? An empty house? A mother who only saw me as a reflection of her own ambitions? A life so perfectly polished it had lost all meaning? I had walked away from a man who had loved me more than anything. I had abandoned 2 innocent children who had needed me. And now, I had to live with the fact that they had learned to exist without me, thrive without me. Michael had told me as much, his words delivered without cruelty, but with a finality that shattered me. "We don't need you anymore." I watched her leave, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, my heart a tangled mess of emotions I didn't have the energy to sort through. There was a time when seeing Sophia would have destroyed me, a time when I would have begged her to stay, fought for her, convinced her that we could rebuild everything she had thrown away. But that time had passed. I wasn't the broken man she had left behind. I wasn't waiting for her anymore. And my children? They didn't even know who she was. That was the part that hit her the hardest. I had seen it in her eyes, the way her breath hitched when I said it. "They don't remember you." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just the truth. And the truth had finally caught up to her. She had left, believing I would crumble without her. Instead, I had risen. And now, there was no room left for her here. I don't know how long I sat in that parking lot before my phone rang. I almost ignored it. But then I saw the name on the screen. Mother. I hesitated, then picked up. "Where are you?" she asked immediately, her tone clipped. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Out." A pause. Then, "Did you go see him?" Of course, she knew. She always knew. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Yes." She sighed like I was a child who had just embarrassed her in public. "Sophia, what did I tell you? That man is nothing. You have no reason to." "They don't remember me." I cut in, my voice hoarse. Silence. For the first time in my life, my mother had nothing to say. "I left my family for you," I whispered. "And for what?" "Sophia," she started, but I didn't let her finish. "I'm not coming back, Mother." Her sharp intake of breath was almost satisfying. Almost. I ended the call before she could speak again. I had wasted too many years living by her rules. And for what? To end up alone? After Sophia left, I went back inside, closing the door behind me. The twins were still asleep, their tiny faces relaxed, peaceful. I crouched beside them, brushing my fingers over my daughter's soft curls. This was what mattered. Not the past. Not Sophia. This. The life I had built for them. The security, the love, the happiness. I had spent too long mourning what I had lost. Now, I only cared about what I had gained. The sun was rising when I finally got back to my apartment. Everything felt different now. I had no illusions left. Michael would never take me back. My children would never know me as their mother. And maybe that was what I deserved. I took one last look at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the girl who had left her family behind for money and status. She was someone else now. Someone who had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, that was the price I had to pay to finally be free. With one final breath, I walked away. And this time, I didn't look back. 9 and 10, moving forward without her. I woke up the morning after Sophia's visit feeling lighter than I had in years. I had expected to feel something. Maybe anger. Maybe pain. Maybe a lingering ache from seeing her face again. But there was nothing. No sadness. No resentment. Just relief. Because last night had proved something I hadn't fully realized until now. I was free. Sophia was nothing more than a shadow of my past, and she had no hold over my life anymore. I had built something without her, something stronger, something unshakable, and I wasn't about to let anything, or anyone, disrupt it. I went about my morning as usual, made breakfast, played with the twins, answered emails from customers. It felt like just another day, which, in a way, was the biggest sign of all. Sophia's return should have shaken my world. But it hadn't. I had already rebuilt my life. And now, I was moving forward. That afternoon, I had a meeting with a group of investors who were interested in helping expand Little Warriors into retail stores. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have even imagined something like this. Back then, I was just a struggling single father, trying to make ends meet. But today, I walked into that meeting as a man who had earned his place in the world. The deal was a success. When I left the office, I checked my phone, scrolling through emails from customers, parents thanking me for what my business had done for them. And as I read those messages, a realization settled deep in my chest. This was the life I was meant to have. Not one trapped under someone else's expectations. Not one spent chasing after people who never valued me. This, my children, my business, my future. That's all I needed. I didn't see or hear from Sophia after that night. I don't know where she went. Maybe she tried to fix things with her mother. Maybe she left town. Maybe she stayed, watching from a distance as we continued on without her. But it didn't matter anymore. She had made her choice, and we had made ours. The past was the past, and I had no reason to look back. That night, as I tucked the twins into bed, I found myself pausing by their cribs, just watching them sleep. 2 little miracles who had saved me in ways they would never fully understand. They didn't need to know how hard it had been. They didn't need to know about the nights I had spent crying, about the rejections, about the fear that had nearly swallowed me whole. All they needed to know was that I had never given up on them, and I never would. As I turned off the lights and stepped out of their room, I felt something settle inside me. Something strong. Something unshakable. This was my life, and it was just getting started.